Works and Gang Reduction Committee. I am joined by my colleagues, Mr. Rue, Ms. Martinez, Ms. Rodriguez. Mr. Buscaglia will be joining us in about 20 minutes. Why don't we start with general public comment? We have one card, and we'll take that up front. So if I could ask Mr. Bill Watkins to come forward. Mr. Watkins? Going once, going twice, okay. General public comment is closed. Unless there's an objection from my colleagues, I'd like to move items number 1 and items numbers 6 through 12 on consent. Any objection? Seeing no objection, that'll be the order. And that will take us to item number 2. And Mr. Espinosa, would you please read item number 2 into the record?
Item number 2 is a motion from Council Members Rodriguez and Buscaglia relative to expanding the city's ongoing mitigation work addressing mud and debris risks caused by the Latuna fire to areas now at risk due to the damage caused by the Creek fire.
Great. And Ms. Rodriguez, do you want to say this is a motion that particularly affected your district? If you wanted to say a few words up front, you're welcome to, and then I can bring up Mr. Schmidt.
No, we can go ahead and just bring it.
Okay. And Mr. Schmidt from the Bureau of Engineering to the podium, along with Rob Freeman from the Emergency Management Department.
Good afternoon, members. I'm Rob Freeman, Assistant General Manager for the Emergency Management Department. I am joined here today by Patrick Schmidt from the Bureau of Engineering. Thought maybe I'd just give a few preliminary comments to brief the committee on where we are with ongoing efforts, and then I'll turn it over to Patrick for some details on the specific mitigation efforts that are recommended. Emergency Management Department is a coordination agency for the city for emergency response and recovery, and I chair a task force that was established to look at storm mitigation efforts that could be taken in the aftermath of the Latuna fire. And we've expanded the scope of our task force work to now include the Creek and Skirball fires. So some of the practices that we've continued to these more recent fires is working with our partners in the city and county public works department to do a complete assessment of the burn area, to identify risks, to recommend specific mitigation steps that the city can take, and then also working with our federal partners in the Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service. They have an emergency watershed protection program that can reimburse up to 75% of the cost of eligible mitigation efforts. So we completed a notice of interest with NRCS that was accepted, and they have also now completed and forwarded to us a series of recommendations for mitigation work. Those recommendations have also been forwarded to the Bureau of Engineering, who's come up with their own recommendations. So now we're in a process of trying to determine, of the various recommendations made, which are the ones that we recommend moving forward with. So we meet on a monthly basis and more regularly as needed to facilitate that process. So again, city and county public works agencies, as well as our federal partners, we're completing the list of recommended mitigation work. I might also mention that at Councilmember Rodriguez's request, we're also helping to facilitate a community town hall meeting that will be held at Sylmar High School on March 1st. This is similar to the session that we did for the Latuna fire, where community members are invited to come and hear presentations from fire, public works, emergency management, animal services, some of the other key agencies that were involved in fire response, to take a look at that issue, but also more specifically, so what can homeowners be doing, residents be doing to prepare for winter weather? So we look forward to that opportunity on March 1st to get community members educated, get them signed up for our Notify LA system, so that if they need to be alerted to the need for evacuations or other directions from the city, that they are primed to do that. So we have our task force meeting next week. But in the interim, we're continuing to work with our public works partners so that we can come up with a specific set of recommendations. So at this point, unless there's any general questions about kind of that process that we're going through, I'd turn it over to Patrick that can comment on the specific mitigation efforts.
Thank you.
Patrick.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Patrick Schmidt, the Bureau of Engineering, Geotechnical Engineering Division. Before getting into our evaluation for the creek and the Skirball fires, I just wanted to give everybody an update on the actions that were taken for the Latuna fire mitigation. Through the council motion, there was $696,000 allocated to do phases 1 and 2 of the mitigation work. Mitigation work in November, we had to come up with a cost estimate of a little bit over $3.1 million for mitigation work associated with the fire. Working with the CAO's office, we broke that down into 3 phases. The first 2 phases was work that could be done more rapidly and quickly. The council motion for the $696,000 was to complete phases 1 and 2. Both of those phases have been 100% completed. As Rob mentioned, a portion of that is NRCS reimbursable work. We've completed that work, and now we've been focusing on the evaluations for the creek and the Skirball fires. For the creek fire, working with, as Rob mentioned, the county, Los Angeles County Department of Public Works and NRCS, we evaluated 16 sites. Of the 16 sites, we've identified 6 sites that don't require any further action. We've identified 4 sites, which include 5 city debris basins that we're recommending 4 of the 5 that are partially filled be cleaned out as soon as possible before future rain seasons or future rains. There's 2 sites which were in the NRCS report. The draft report has been submitted that includes the installation of 160 feet of K-rail, which we concur with that recommendation at those 2 sites. There's 1 site, which is a city paper street, where the city, some point in time, constructed a debris wall across the right-of-way. That debris wall has been completely filled in behind it, and it's overtopping with debris and starting to displace out in the front of the wall. We're recommending that wall, behind the wall, in front of the wall, the debris be cleaned up. There's 1 site that's on private property that had some previously constructed debris fences that have been destroyed by the debris flows that we're recommending that those be repaired. Once again, that's on private property though, so we're not recommending that work be done by city forces or through our emergency on-call contractors. There's 2 other sites that have 4 privately owned debris basins that we're recommending be cleaned out by the private property owners. And that's it for the creek fire. For the Skirball fire, the majority of the fire is in a canyon area that was the homes and the private properties back up against the hillsides of the canyon. There's not much city access there. It's a private road, private development. It's a close community. There is 1 debris structure at the end of the road that we're recommending that be cleaned out. That is a city debris structure. And there is going to be a recommendation for installation of some K-rail along Sepulveda Boulevard in that fire area. That's all I have. If anybody has any questions.
Yes.
If you have a question,
Yes.
just to start, a quick question. The federal money, how much is being reimbursed by the feds?
As Rob mentioned, up to 75% is reimbursable, only a portion of that. The NRCS, they will not reimburse us for work to protect city infrastructure. They will only reimburse us for work that protects structures. So essentially for the Latuna fire, the reimbursable work for the NRCS is the placement of the K-rail. And I'm not sure how much we're getting back. We need to calculate out how much the actual cost was, but it's up to 75% of the value of the cost.
We can get up to, but we're trying to get as much as we can, obviously.
Excuse me?
We're trying to get up to that 75%.
Yeah, we'll work with them to get as much as we can.
Okay. Ms. Rodriguez.
Yeah. So all the surveying work has been completed in terms of the environmentals of the burn areas in the creek fire. That's all been completed from the geological?
Correct. Just finished up yesterday.
Okay.
The last site visit was yesterday for the Skirball fire.
Okay, for Skirball, but creek is all complete?
Creek's 100% complete.
Okay, awesome. And that was pretty much my bigger concerns. And so for the potential for the identified potential for slides as a result of that, is there anything of note? I know in Latuna, in the Latuna fire, we had Latuna Canyon, we had some areas that were of higher concern, which we mitigated with the K-rails and a lot of great work that actually saved a lot of homes with those rains. So kudos to the department, Bureau of Street Services, engineering, EMD, everyone working collaboratively, we actually helped to save quite a bit of private property as a result of that. Didn't save a couple of, one or two police cars that I think got stuck in the mud, but it was okay. So that are the two locations where you cited the 160 feet of K-rail, that's to address some of those vulnerabilities?
Correct.
Okay.
To protect structures. The unfortunate thing is with the burn area for the creek fire and the skirball fire, the majority of the burned hillsides back up against private properties on the back side, and there's really not much we can do from Public Works to protect those homes.
Yeah. Now that's challenging topography over there. Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. Are there any additional questions? Great. Without objection, recommend that we approve this motion. Seeing no objection, motion is approved.
Thank you
so much. Okay. Yeah, Mr. Buscaino wanted to be here for item 3, so we'll jump to item 4. And I also see Mr. Cedillo is here. And oh, okay, Mr. Watkins is here. Why don't we do the public comment right now? His comment is on item 4? Okay. Mr. Watkins, why don't you come and make your comment on item 4, and you can also have, we called general public comment already, but we'll go ahead and give it to you now. So go ahead and do your 1 minute on this item, followed by your 1 minute of general public comment.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much.
We'll,
okay. Hi. Hello, everyone. Appreciate that. Yeah, I just got water and I missed that spot. I apologize. So on the item, 3 and 4. Can I do 3 and 4 right now? Because that's what I signed up for. Okay. So quickly, thanks for thinking of bikes. It's better than cars, and I appreciate David and anyone looking for alternative transportation in our kind of smelly vehicles and trucks. I do want to raise attention to something I brought up in Mr. Blumenfield's office with an officer, and that's that our storm drains generally are clogged by trash and debris. Generally, when I'll say districts 1 and 14, I'm good at as a pedestrian cleaner, a volunteer cleaner. About 80% of our storm drains are clogged with trash. I just think it becomes a higher priority than anything related to bikes, transportation, that's fancy at all. I want to just make sure our attention is on the ground. It's what I'm pitching for, is pedestrian cleaners to be a part of the city as a workforce. But I've noticed some real problems, and that could really be a problem with flooding and can be a real safety hazard, as well as an eyesore to see a bunch of trash and Frito-Lay bags inside of a gutter. It's unfortunate. So I hope we pay attention to that, really start to prioritize what I see on the ground is really a problem. Thanks. And with the baseball, just I hope funding is sought for cleaning. When something like that comes to town, I hope that you really make a push for cleanup, LA cleanup, gutters, storm drains, sidewalks, roads. Make a push. Make it nice for the people coming in and make it nice for us afterwards. I hope that's thought of. Lastly, a general comment regarding, quote, gangs. Don't reduce gangs. Eradicate gangs with a better budget. Our budget for safety is at 42%. Let's make it 50. The other 50 should be infrastructure. Anything not related to safety or infrastructure in the city, I don't buy it as something we should be doing. Thanks, and thanks for the time early. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. So Mr. Espinosa, I don't know did you read item 4 into the record? Let's make sure we do that.
Yes, item 4 is a motion from Council Members Cedillo and Harris Dawson relative to the acceptance of funds from the Los Angeles Dodgers for the provision of city services that may be required to host the 2020 Major League Baseball All-Star Game.
Great. And we have Mr. Paul Smith from CLA's office, but I see we have Mr. Cedillo. Mr. Cedillo, if you'd like to start, we're welcome to take your comments on this item, which is, I assume, why you're here.
Colleagues, obviously we're very excited to be working with the Dodgers, and more than that, we're very excited that we have an opportunity, like we just did this weekend with NBA basketball, to host the Major League Baseball All-Star Game. It'll be an incredible week of activities, generating $90 million for the city. We will also, the Dodgers are committed to leaving behind $1.5 million for us to do work with young people and nonprofits It's an extraordinary opportunity for us, and we're very excited about it. As you know, we are nothing if we are not nothing but sports and entertainment in the city. And every event, as we move towards the Olympics, is an event that builds us as an international city. It's just who we are. Every restaurant, every cafe, every movie theater, every source that we have of culture and entertainment gets boosted by these major events. And if you don't know that, you didn't see downtown Los Angeles this last week. It was simply bustling for the entire parameter of downtown Los Angeles and then in the entire city, because all our hotels were filled, all our restaurants were filled, and it was just one of the most exciting weekends the city has experienced. And so we have another opportunity with Major League Baseball. We should embrace that, and I ask for your support on this measure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cedillo, next we have Paul Smith, CLA's office.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Paul Smith, CLA. I think the council member spoke eloquently to the issues. If you have any questions, I will answer them. I will tell you a little background. In 2009, when we amended the special event ordinance, we did include a provision for special venues, entertainment and sports venues, allowed us to negotiate a price for services, type of services, amount of services, and do it by contract. And we intend to do it again with the Dodgers, and that contract will reflect the notion that we get an economic benefit from having these iconic events in the city, that they are a source of revenue to the general community. And again, we'll work with the CAO in developing a contract on this.
Great, thank you. And that contract will reflect, so there's a lot of costs that need to be recovered, and on anything like this, we get a great benefit, and I certainly thrilled that we're going to bring the All-Star game here, and I think it's going to be a huge boost for this city, and strong support of that idea. In terms of getting our cost recovery, I assume all of those things are enumerated in the contract?
Yes, but I also understand in this one in general terms that the Dodgers will be paying for some of the more routine costs, no matter if it's this event or if it's a special or a regular field event. That'd be transportation costs and those kind of things. They were already, so it would be in excess of the $100,000 actually, because they're already going to pay those routine costs back to the city.
I mean, the cost that they pay for every Dodger game that's there.
Right, similar to what they would pay for.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Similar to what they would pay for normal services, routine services.
So the $100,000 is above and beyond what they pay for the routine services?
I'm not conversant with the particulars of it, but generally that's the package that's before. They'll pay routine costs plus the $100,000.
Okay, so it's sort of the $100,000 is the bonus amount, and then the rest of it is the routine that we get.
I don't necessarily call it the bonus amount, but it would be a negotiated amount.
Colleagues, questions? Mr. Buscano?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Was really excited about this item before us, item number 4. In fact, turning to Ms. Rodriguez, I believe last time we hosted the Major League All-Star game, we were maybe in first grade, and that was quite some time. And I know that when MLB comes and kind of deciphers where to host a Major League Baseball All-Star game, they look at the newest stadiums. But I do want to recognize that we have an historic stadium. I know it's I think the third oldest stadium, but a number of significant improvements have been made to lead us to the interests of Major League Baseball to host the All-Star game. It's overdue. It's our turn. I believe it's our time. I do want to recognize Mr. Cedillo's leadership for supporting this. I know it impacts his district. But I know that the Dodgers, they pay for their own security services. I know they also pay for the off-duty LAPD officers. And I believe this agreement before us is acceptable. And even more so like the Olympics, and even when we're talking about FIFA bringing the World Cup here. This is going to be an incredible economic boost to this entire city and this region as well, as it relates to hotel dollars coming in, folks coming, restaurants, shopping, and but for me, as chairman of the Trade, Tourism, and Travel Committee, it's going to be an opportunity for us to market our city. And this is earned media that we've talked about, which is deserving to our city. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for your leadership on this, and hoping we send a message to Major League Baseball that, yes, we want you here for the 2020 All-Star Game. Thank you.
Ms. Martinez.
A quick question. What's the timeline of the acceptance of the All-Star Games? How long do we have before we know whether we have been awarded the All-Star Games?
I wish I knew the answer to that.
You don't know the answer? Does Mr. Cedillo know the answer?
We could look into that and try to get back to you.
When are they letting you know, Gil? Soon. Okay. That works.
They're coming to town soon, maybe this weekend, I don't know. And so it looks good if we've moved this item, because it demonstrates to them our commitment to working with them. Of course, the Dodgers have made extraordinary commitments. There was this anime convention that was already scheduled at the convention center, and that's huge. And they've had to substitute them out, so they've already dropped in over $1 million. They have made commitments to this in preparation that are really extraordinary. No other organization has made that type of commitment, but they've done that in anticipation of our ongoing collaboration with the Dodgers and the city.
Where are they at?
Good question.
Sorry, I'm not a sports expert. Is that a Google check?
Yeah.
Never. Okay,
Google
never
that.
mind.
Some city other than
Just
LA.
wondering. It's not coming to LA. Okay, it sounds like it's next year's Cleveland. Okay.
Cleveland, Los Angeles.
Didn't want to complicate matters, Mr. Chair. I'm fine with the item.
Colleagues, additional questions?
It also, if I can, Mr. Chair, interesting to note that we just hosted the NBA All-Star Game, which was, it was amazing. Yeah, it was amazing. Was that right? But to be able to showcase our city, downtown was booming. It was bustling because of the NBA All-Star Game. So
I was with at the Adidas event, 7th in Alameda. I was also at the Staples on the campus on Sunday. It's just extraordinary, and I've obviously written legislation. I wrote the Downtown Rebound. I've been interested in this subject matter, and art and entertainment and culture is to Los Angeles what ag is to the Central Valley, wine is to Napa and Sonoma. It is a core industry for us. It is a staple. So many people get to work. So many people get overtime. So many people get extra work. And it's not just, it's far from the stadium. It's just what it does in the entirety. I had dinner Saturday night and saw people come from out of town at a restaurant downtown. It opens up our city and it builds our brand, as Mr. Buscaino was saying. It builds our brand, and as we move towards the Olympics and other major events, World Cup, this continues to place us as a destination for the rest of the world. And it does incredible boost to restaurants, cafes, hotels, etc. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. CEO, for your comments, and also thank you for taking leadership on this important issue and helping make this happen. So I'm excited about this. I do want to, when the contract comes back, I want to look at it carefully and more generally look at
We
sort
might
of...
need to include Mr. Buscaino singing the national anthem at this event as well. I just wanna- Yeah, so we might have to
Yeah.
amend that.
We might lose our clout as a city. So, yeah, I'm going to have to object to that amendment. But what I was saying is, we want to move this forward, really put forward a good light to make sure that we induce these folks and get this to happen. I do want to look at that contract when it comes forward and compare how we do a lot of these different things throughout the city in terms of our cost recovery, make sure that we have a systemic way of doing this. But as was said, this is the $100,000 number that's there is what we're going to, is basically the minimum, and then we'll see what the cost recovery looks like in the contract. But let's move forward with this. So without objection, it is so ordered, and this item is approved. Congratulations, Mr. Cedillo. All right, now we're going to go back to item number 3. Now that Mr. Buscaino is here, Mr. Espinosa, would you please read that into the record?
Item number 3 is a report from the Department of Transportation relative to developing a pilot program to test dockless bike sharing. And this was also referred to the Transportation Committee.
Great. We have Marcel Porras from LADOT. You could provide us an overview of the DOT report and the preliminary work that the department has done up to this point.
Good afternoon, council members. Marcel Porras, Chief Sustainability Officer, LADOT. Before you is a preliminary report that the department put together regarding a dockless bike sharing. Dockless bike sharing is a new form of bike sharing. Currently, the city is engaged as a partner with Metro on a publicly operated and funded bike share program. Dockless bike sharing is a privately funded new mobility service, with the key distinction is that unlike the Metro system, which is station-based, this one is free-floating. And so the bikes are accessible via a smartphone application and can be unlocked and used on a per-trip basis. Currently in the city, we have a pilot that has been led by Councilmember Buscaino in his district, and there's also a couple of pilots, one with Recon Parks in Griffith Park, and one in Cal State Northridge through an agreement with Cal State Northridge and one of the dockless bike share providers. As any new form of technology that enters into the city, LADOT is interested in spending some time actually developing rules and guidelines. I think that when we look at we have to look at the best case, but also we have to look at the worst case scenario. And I think when we look at smaller pilots of 250, 300, 500 bikes, I think that is definitely a good opportunity to start understanding the technology. But I think as a department, we have the responsibility to really start calculating what happens when these systems potentially scale to 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 bikes. And so we've been spending time reaching out to partners across the country to understand what are some of the different rules and guidelines that have been leading the way. We've consulted the city of Seattle and Washington, D.C., which have been some of the first early adopters around dockless. And we have, based on their input, put together some draft regulations internally that we've started to share with some of our counterparts. I think as DOT, one of the main concerns that we are going to have is really the issue of enforcement. Particularly as these bikes are left in the right-of-way, and even more so on sidewalks, mainly. And that's something that DOT doesn't specifically have jurisdiction over in terms of enforcement. So we have circulated some preliminary parking guidelines to our counterparts in the Bureau of Street Services for their review. I think it's a first step. The other key component of this is really understanding how do we actually evaluate. And so one of the things that the Seattle system has been doing is they entered into a partnership with the University of Washington to actually receive, aggregate, and evaluate data of the system. And so I think that is one of the key components that we also envision as a part of a pilot program here in the city, so that we can make sure that we're not just taking the system at its word, but also being able to look at and evaluate and measure as we try to right-size the technology for Los Angeles. As a Chief Sustainability Officer for LADOT, my interest is in increasing shared mobility across the region. And so whether that is with primarily Metro bike share, or if that's engaging with the private sector on dockless, that's something that we're open to in the innovation, but we just have to be very prudent about how we welcome the technology. At the time that I wrote the report, it was simply looking at non-motorized bikes, but I think there is what we're starting to see is, I know in Santa Monica, and I've had reports that there are electric scooter technology that is being used, and I think that raises another question. I've also observed that some of the dockless bike share companies are already starting to look at how to electrify and how to include an electric assist option into their fleet. And so that's something that I'll be considering with my staff as we look back and actually set rules and guidelines. How do we actually incorporate and take into consideration these the electrified modes technology options?
Great. So you mentioned that the evaluation is critical and what some other areas are doing. So how would the city go about collecting the data and doing our own evaluations?
So I think primary to that is requiring in the rules and guidelines that we have access to the data. First and foremost, I think realizing where our limitations are as city staff to actually manage the data is where I've engaged with some of the universities in terms of seeing what capacity do they have to actually store the data on a cloud, provide some of the data analytics. And so for us, we're outcome driven in terms of, what type of, are they complying in terms of parking the bikes where they're going to be parked, the number of trips that they're actually being, the utilization of the system. And so the vision that LADOT has is that we would work in partnership through either an MOU that we establish with a university research partner.
And you mentioned enforcement also. DOT or BSS, or even you've talked about sanitation, which department would be responsible for enforcement?
I think that is to be determined. I think currently, when I think about worst case scenarios, if let's say you have a broken bike or a bike without a saddle, the first expectation would be that the operator have responsibility over that bike and removing that bike from that system. But in the case that doesn't happen, I think the city has to, in order to preserve kind of the public safety and accessibility issues, I think we must be ready to actually impound those bikes, and so and pass on that cost to the operator. DOT doesn't actually have that function. That is something that I think technically bulky item pickup is under Bureau of Sanitation. And that is those conversations that we need to have about whether or not that's actually...
But sanitation specifically is not allowed to pick up bicycles.
Right. And so that's where I think there would need to be consideration in terms of, is there amendments of ordinances? Is it something we do through a third-party contractor? On the Bureau of Street Services side, I think they're also limited in terms of resources of street investigators. And so what is the investigation part of making sure that our sidewalks are clear and there's accessibility? We can write rules and guidelines about parking requirements, but if we don't have an ability and like a stick to actually enforce and evaluate, then I think we're going to find ourselves in a tough situation. And again, I think part of this is we have to plan worst case scenarios, but the ideal is that we're working in partnership with the companies to evaluate, and I think we're putting triggers in to a pilot that allows them to grow based on good behavior, but then also takes away their ability to operate based on bad behavior.
I guess with the pilot, I would want to make sure that there is, for the city's aspect, that we have very clear understanding of who's enforcing. And even to the point of, I'm happy to amend this to specifically put that on, BSS or DOT or combination. I don't think sanitation makes sense, but I hate to move forward without some clarity on that issue, because that could, we'll all end up with a lot of complaints without the right authority to turn to. I worry about some of the blight issues too. I mean, love the idea of the dockless bikes, and I know it's working in both of your districts. And I know Mr. Ruiz and my staff was in Griffith Park, but they talked about seeing just sort of some bikes strewn across the side, just laying there like roadkill. And the question is, how do you make sure that doesn't happen? That what is a great program doesn't turn into an avenue for blight? Either clear definitions of where people need to put the things, what the responsibility is of the the dockless bike company to come by every night and pick up the ones that are in the wrong spot. What do you do with the ones that have been thrown against a private building? And if we're not careful, we're going to have a lot of stuff just out there.
I think the other element that I would add is, and General Manager Salito Reynolds mentioned this at the Transportation Committee, is that these are technology companies, and so we're not talking about a mom and pop startup that is trying to run a bike share fleet. I think when we look at some of the companies, they're venture capital funded, companies out of China, and there's no knock on that specifically, but I think as LA, putting together rules and guidelines that protect the public well-being while also encouraging new mobility options, I think is at the forefront of my mind, and I think something that we've engaged preliminarily with the industry, but and with counterparts across the country to try to really solve this issue, because I think it's a great opportunity to expand bike sharing, particularly in areas which may not be next in line to get serviced by Metro Bike Share.
Do you need additional resources to do the evaluation and the permit and managing this program, or can it be done within the current resources?
I think potentially, that would be part of the recommendations that we come back with, but I think looking within our own budgets is something we would do first, because again, we support the new technology, and so I think it's part of a larger discussion that doesn't even just pertain to just bike share, but as we talk about car sharing, as we talk about updating our taxi fleet, as we look at microtransit, there is this kind of underpinning of data and evaluation that the department is currently working on and evaluating, because and this leads in kind of to the larger strategy around autonomous vehicles hitting our streets. Like, how do we get our data house in order as a department to really make sound policy and programmatic recommendations around new mobility as it impacts LA?
Got a million questions, but I know my colleagues do as well. Mr. Rue, you were eager to ask something, so go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really want to thank you for scheduling this item, and this is a very exciting program, and I wholeheartedly support this, and I'm so glad that we're having this heard. This is central to making Los Angeles more mobile and increasing our city's health and quality of life. And this is an important component of our transportation system being interconnected and intermodal, and it particularly addresses the first and last mile problem. And in particular, the dockless bike sharing has the potential to become more convenient, more accessible, and more affordable than the traditional bike sharing system, and as well as greatly increasing the mobility in Los Angeles. But I do want to stress, and actually you addressed a lot of these issues as well, that we want this pilot to start right. And it's important that we get it right and we don't go down the path like some other U.S. cities and some international cities like cities in China have. So I have a couple of questions. And it seems like you answered one of them about, so in this, ordinance, you're going to address scooters or electric bikes as well?
Yes.
Okay. And also, given that the relative newness of the dockless biking industry, there are some questions about, even though many are funded by large investment firms and all of that and lots of backing, there is some question about long-term viability. And from a customer service perspective, if a company does go out of business, there could be a lack of consistency and reliability in operations. Are you going to, in your ordinance, provide an opportunity for other carriers or other providers to fill that immediately, or how would that work?
I think initially the first piece that we're looking at is just understanding the technology and understand who we have as partners. I think that we're looking similarly to how Seattle and Washington, D.C. have done it. They've opted to just open up to whoever wants to actually pursue a permit, so that's multiple operators in those cities. And so I think part of that is it's that pilot. It's that 12-month, the 24-month section to see, hey, are these companies able to provide a service, a mobility service, whether or not they are able to continue under the pilot parameters that we establish, I think is something that they need to decide. I think for me, part of the pilot is to see if someone fails, right? And so I wouldn't be in a rush to fill that gap, but I think the companies are going to be fighting for market share. And so I think if it makes sense, I could see other companies stepping up, and that's something that we could
So
definitely-
5 years out, I mean, after we prove the pilot successful, 5 years out, 10 years out, there will be ability for companies to expand or constrict based on demand, right? So if one of their competitors goes out of business, there will be an opportunity, or do they have to refile or apply for permits to increase their, bike sharing capacity?
I think that both of those options would be on the table.
Okay. And then, I want you to comment something on liability, because a lot of calls that I get is because they're dockless bikes, and there are some issues of people just leaving them in random places. But I had lots of concerns from constituents concerned about bike theft or parts being stolen or liability issues. But which is the case, but the city is fully exempt from those liabilities, right? If a bike gets stolen or a bike gets damaged, parts of the bike get stolen, we have no liability in that, right?
Yeah, so in putting together some some early regulations that really just address indemnity and insurance and liability questions, we have something right now for Council District 15 in place that indemnifies the city, and that was something that we did in the month of December, and we executed those contracts last month.
Great. And you talked about enforcement as well. I'm sure we're going to be collecting data on enforcement, right? What the problems are, what type of complaints there are, and what areas are being collected in, so we could see some trends. I'm sure your department's going to do that, right?
Yeah, we're definitely interested in understanding what the concerns are. And that'll be part of the discussion with the industry about what type of information they're willing to release or not. And I think it is an ongoing dialogue and discussion.
Do you have a sense, final question, Mr. Chair, do you have a sense of what the protocol is going to be on the complaints? So if there is, various companies' bikes just on the public roadway, on the public right-of-way, or just bulky item just all over the place. With the complaint, do you imagine a system where the complaint goes to the company for them to address it, or would the complaint be addressed by city staff, and then do we bill the company, or have you guys thought through that yet?
I think we would have to have the operator take responsibility, and we do that currently. And I think that's one of the good things about us having this partnership with Metro, where we have a public bike share system, is because we have a lot of lessons learned. I think that when we talk to our current operator for bike share, bicycle transit systems, their critique is the reason that we're more expensive is because we have larger overhead, because we have requirements that were set by the Metro board in terms of minority business, disadvantaged business. And so those are definitely, first and foremost, if we have an issue, it's not me going out, it's our operator. And they have a maintenance staff, they have maintenance facilities, they have folks in the field. And so I think similarly, we would require a certain level of operations and maintenance be conducted by the private dockless companies.
Okay. And if they don't respond in time, we'll have other options?
I think the option would be just to eliminate their permit or the pilot. The other one, and again, that's ultimately going to need to be decided by the policymakers, but the recommendations would be eliminate the pilot. In the Seattle example, they put fees on, if you violate the rules and guidelines, there's a charge. Strike 2, strike 3. And then equally, we can incentivize. If you're a good actor, hey, we're going to, with those first 200 bikes or 500 bikes, you're a great operator. Let's go ahead and give you the opportunity to expand your footprint by another 500 bikes or 1,000 bikes or 2,000 bikes. And so those are the options that will be part of a future discussion with both this committee and the Transportation Committee.
Well, hopefully if you could look into some sort of enforcement mechanism where because I'm more concerned about our office getting a call about various complaints, and if we push that along to the various companies and they don't respond in time, I mean, I'd rather call sanitation or somebody in city forces to go pick up the bike or take care of that issue, and then we could find them, bill them, I don't know, charge them a storage fee, whatever it is, if you could kind of work that into the system.
Mr. Buscaino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for also scheduling this important item. Been really fortunate to be on the leading edge of this new technology or new transportation option, and this is what it's all about, is giving our residents transportation options, whether you want to take public transportation, get on a bus, or use a dock bike sharing program or a dockless bike sharing program, or hop in an Uber or a Lyft. This is why I embrace this, and when I was first introduced to the dockless bike share program through my affiliation with National League of Cities as one of the best practices that have been used in other parts of the country, like Denver and Seattle and Washington, D.C. I said, why not us? And it was important. In CD15, often we always get overlooked on pilot programs, so it was important for us to lead this. And it was the reason why we launched this effort. It was for more of the disadvantaged, impacted communities, such as Watts, where we don't have any docked bike share programs there. So we launched it in Watts, and it kind of bled to have more interest in Wilmington and Harbor City, and even more so in San Pedro, to the point where it's trending, and it's cool. I ride down the street with my kids, and my daughter goes, "Dad, line bike on the right." My son, when we pull up at his high school, we see a few line bikes in front of his high school, so we know that it's being used. In fact, it was important for us to build a relationship with the company because, like those same concerns that you had, Mr. Chair, and the same concerns that you have, Mr. Ryu, these are all valid concerns that need to be addressed and hold these companies accountable. We have experienced some Facebook posts that, show a line bike in the rocks down at Cabrillo Beach. We've seen a Facebook post of a line bike that's dismantled. But I can tell you one thing. As much as we love this program, this company that we're using on a pilot program has been responsive. And that it's been a job generator because they've created jobs by having their folks go to different parts of my district to replace, repair, and relocate the bikes based on the usage. And I do know that Mr. Englander has a problem with line bike right now in his district at CSUN, but they're spilling over to the residential areas, and we were able to connect him with the line bike folks. But whether it's line bike or another company, I can tell you that it's been effective in our district. In fact, if I can, Mr. Chair, share with you some of our successes. So this is data that's been pulled as of yesterday. There have been over 32,000 rides in my district. In the first month, there were over 5,000 active riders. Bike counts in Watts are 138, in Harbor City 64, in Wilmington 194, in San Pedro 498, which plans, because they're doing so well, looks like we're going to mobilize a few extra bikes in these communities. This company that we've been using has listened, adapted, and grown with our community. They've met with a number of community groups, organizations, and they send us bi-weekly high-level analytics. I actually have here before us. So since its inception, we have, since October of 2017, we've had over 64,000 total riders, 15,000 unique riders, and a total miles ridden of over 40,000 miles. And it really breaks down. The average riding distance is 1 mile. So we often talk about the first mile, last mile. It's been, we've seen an improvement. People are using their less vehicle miles traveled. In fact, we saved since October over 15,000 miles, vehicle miles. And again, this is, as you mentioned, this is a technology company, but I think it's a technology company no different than an Uber or Lyft that really does the placemaking and puts bikes according to where they're being used. So I'm happy to report, Mr. Chair, that we have experienced the first dockless bike share program in the city, and it's been impactful and effective. And yes, there's been a couple problems here and there. It's not perfect, but I'm happy that you can use our experience to go citywide on this if indeed we move forward on a citywide pilot program. But there have been photos that we've seen, like in Asia, that these thousands of bikes being just mounted in the trash. But we don't expect to see that anytime in our city or in this country. So thanks for allowing us to do this, and I know, Mr. Rue, that you've experienced some success and, of course, a couple challenges here and there. But again, this is multimodal transportation and giving our residents options. I live in a hilly community in San Pedro. I'm excited more about the electric bikes being deployed because my butt cannot. It's a climb to get to the bus stop.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about the e-bike coming our way.
Well, Mr. Chair, for the record, I'm very excited about this program. Mr. Buscaino might have the first the first bikes in public streets, but I had the first bikes in our public park. Right. So we're technically
All right, folks, you and your bikes. All right.
technically first in Council District 4.
You guys can work that out after the committee hearing. Ms. Martinez.
Thank you. So in T committee, I had asked about the criteria that DOT would be looking at to determine whether this pilot program was successful or not. Have you gotten to that yet or not?
No, we've not.
Okay, and so when do you expect to get back to us on the criteria for determining whether this is successful or not?
I think that'll be part of the report back to T committee at the 45-day once the council adopts the action.
And I missed when you talked about the line bikes. I know that it is not in my district, but I am familiar with CSUN. And for whatever reason, those neighbors are now starting to email me pictures of these bikes on the public right-of-way. Have you seen them?
I have
have them here.
I have not personally, but my staff is attending a neighborhood council meeting this evening.
Okay, well, for whatever reason, people are starting to email our office with pictures like this. I guess the bike was just literally just disposed of on the public right-of-way, and there's other pictures. So people are upset about this. There's one in a parking lot where obviously that's not where it belongs. So I just want to make sure you've seen these. So if we're going to do this, we better do it right and hold people accountable, or else this isn't going to work.
Agreed.
So on this program, on this pilot, for example, we know who rented the bike last, right? So we know where it was potentially left behind. Is there any mechanism in place with these technology companies for them to perhaps, cite the user for where they're leaving the bikes? Because I was just looking at the map. There are some in your district. It may not be operating there, but it's in Panorama City too. There's a couple of bikes there. End up in your district.
Yeah, we've experienced line bikes appearing in neighboring jurisdictions like
mostly
Lamita,
line bikes.
and also Carson, Rancho Palos Verdes. But in response, what they do, and I don't know if we have a line bike representative here, but because of the GPS technology attached to the bike, these guys go out every night to pick them up. And their line is, as much as you love our line bike, we ask that you not keep it, because they'll just door knock it and go to where the technology, or at least the GPS map shows where these bikes are. So if they are out of place, then the employees go out and pick up. And is anyone here from Line Bike can share that or not? No?
I understand that it's just one more thing people are calling us to deal with. We've got enough stuff going on.
Yeah.
And the question, where do the bikes go? I mean, where are they supposed to go? Because they do go, even in the pilot, on the right-of-way at different points, correct?
Right.
Yes. So what Seattle and DC have done is they've determined specific parking rules and guidelines within the parkway, outside of kind of curb ramps, accessibility issues, and so they have their standards that have been developed in the parking. But it comes down to, you know, how can you enforce? Like, if the guidelines are there, how are you evaluating? So it's through spot checks, it's through customer feedback. You know, to me, I'm still trying to understand a little bit better the technology, because does each bike have a GPS on it, or is it actually the app that ends the ride that tags where the bike should be, right? And so those are technologies that I think are still, from my understanding, are varying between the companies. And so I think it's up to us to create a standard. And as another example, I don't believe the bikes are required to have front headlights, but I think as the city currently has that requirement as part of our Metro bike share system. So if we want to encourage safety, improve safety, I think those are things that we have to consider. Another consideration is,
someone could theoretically get a ticket for not having a light on their bike.
It's not required to have a light on the front, but I believe it is required to have one on the back, but not on the front. And so I think that's part of all the rulemaking that we're going to be making specifically to the state. And my understanding is that companies have been able to accommodate, you know, local and state requirements. And I think that partly has to do with the cycle time on manufacturing. I think the other question that we have to grapple with is, do we require a locking device on these bikes, right?
Require what?
Should we require a locking bike? We're currently, right now, the majority of the dockless bike share companies only have a rear wheel lock, so someone could actually just pick it up, throw it in the river, knock it down on the floor. It's a policy question. Do we require an additional lock that requires the bike to be locked to something? A bike rack, a light pole? Is that one of the ways? Now, I think that's a question that I would ask the industry, right? What are the pros and cons of that? Is that something that we incentivize? Is it something that we require? I could also think about, what if people are locking it up to private property, right? Is that going to create an issue? So a lot of it is education. I think a lot of that education can be provided within the app by the companies. But if folks aren't enforcing, and if we're not doing the spot checking required, which might be staff intensive, right? So whether or not that is LADOT, or it's through a third party, through a consultant, or through one of our other bureaus, I think that those are the details that we need to work out.
What is our saturation for bike, for sidewalk installed bike systems where people can actually go, they're bike racks, the city sponsored or issued bike racks? What's our saturation throughout the city?
That I'm not sure of. But
Because it would seem to me that would be the right incentive to help address what some of these problems are. Because again, you know, I was just sharing with Councilmember Buscaino, it's almost, you know, in terms of the technology, it seems a lot like Uber, right? And so the disposition of this bicycle, if we identify the more appropriate place to leave the bike and have it locked, it would actually help to address part of the problem. And if not, then at least you have the last user that was associated with that bike. So that information is there. It's whether or not, you know, we just have to, you know, to your point, to identify the appropriate protocols to help ensure that, you know, we're not creating more of a nuisance in some of these areas or impeding the public right-of-way. But I'd be interested in knowing what that looks like in terms of where our bike racks are actually installed throughout the city, because if we're going to be rolling out these pilots, then that could be a plausible solution, I think, going forward.
But there's no question that the bikes that they're talking about even in these pilots far exceed our capacity in bike racks, because we just don't have, at least my area, we have very few actual bike racks. Yeah.
And the beauty of the dockless bike system is that they don't need bike racks, but then it poses other problems like the problems that Councilman Martinez has presented about people just strewing it on the public right-of-way. But I'm very excited about this pilot, and these are all the questions that I look forward to your study when it comes back to answering. I'm confident that we could get through these issues, and unlike Uber, it seems like we're starting ahead of the curve, and before it gets ubiquitous, we want to be able to have a firmer grasp on it. And I mean, all these questions that are being brought up, and that's what I asked about the enforcement earlier, right? If a complaint calls in about a bike on a public street sidewalk right away, who fulfills that complaint? Does it go to the company? If they don't do it, can we do it and we fine them? I mean, it seems like for Lime Bike at Council District 15, they come and pick it up every night. Maybe we require them to do it every X hours because they're all GPS, right, to redistribute the bikes. I mean, that's what some of the other car share technologies are doing, right, where they redistribute the cars. Since we have the users, maybe we fine or bar users who are abusing the system. If they keep on, parking at a place that they shouldn't have, maybe you bar them for a certain amount of time until they could use it again. I mean, these are all, again, where not just you should answer, but maybe the industry needs to answer, because if they could answer these questions, it makes it for a better system and better for the industry. So I'm very much looking forward to your pilot, the results of your pilot, and see how we can move forward.
Great. Kind of maybe a out of left field question, but are any of these bike companies subsidizing with advertising?
I'm not sure what they're doing with the data that they are getting, but as far as I know, they're not advertising on the bikes or that I have seen in the app, and so
I just throw it out as a caution. I know that there are folks out there who want to advertise on bicycles. They've done it in front of my office with different things where they're going to put very large advertisements on bicycles. I don't think that's happening in any of the current bike shares, but I just put that out there as something that would be a big red flag for me, and I think for a lot of folks, to make sure that doesn't creep into any of these bike share programs. It's one thing to identify the bicycle for what it is, but it's another to have sort of, especially advertisements that go beyond the frame of the bicycle. With that, colleagues, unless there's any additional questions or comments, I'm going to recommend that we concur in the recommendations in the December 13th Transportation Committee report, but we also request that the report include an estimated cost for enforcement and administration based on the size of the fleet, and request that enforcement responsibility be with BSS and/or LADOT, but that it rest clearly with somebody. Okay. Without objection, that'll be the order. Thank you so much. Great, thank you. That's exciting stuff. We're moving forward here, and then we'll move to, I believe, one more item, item number 5. Mr. Espinosa, would you read that into the record, please?
Item number 5 is a verbal report from the Bureau of Street Services relative to an update on issues affecting the Urban Forestry Division.
Great. We have Tim Tyson from BSS, Urban Forestry Division. Oh, hello, welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm Greg Spotts, Assistant Director, here with our Chief Forester, Tim Tyson. We're mostly here to respond to your questions, but we wanted to just provide a little summary of recent enhancements we've been able to fund with your support in the Urban Forestry Division, and some new things that we're looking at in the next budget cycle. The Urban Forestry Division in the Bureau of Street Services maintains 700,000 street trees and 10 million square feet of landscape median islands. It's a big job, and in the budget crisis of 2010, the staffing of this division went from over 200 to under 100. And it was a very difficult time for the division. We really got down to the point where we just had enough people to respond to tree emergencies. And the proactive maintenance of the urban forest really wasn't staffed. We've made a lot of progress since then under Tim's leadership. He and I have a terrific collaboration. He reports to me. And in the first term of Mayor Garcetti, we've enjoyed a lot of support from the council and the mayor, and I wanted to just provide about 10 or so enhancements that we've already funded. We restored the annual contracted tree trimming program to a $4 to $5 million level. We hired dedicated inspectors to inspect that contracted tree trimming to make sure that communities were happy with the quality. We started an on-demand program so that we could trim trees for you with city forces on overtime when you have short turnaround projects. We started with $500,000, and now we have more than $1 million a year in that program. That's right. Just a few in CD4, and most of it's in 15. And then recently, the council fully funded the landscape median island maintenance program, and that was very important. We have 10 million square feet of landscape median islands, and in the past, we were spending too little, and the contractors who were bidding on those just couldn't keep up. You have to visit those medians every 2 weeks because things are growing. They're irrigated, and they grow. And we finally now have larger, more professional contractors on board, and I hope you would agree with me that the landscape median islands probably look better today than they've looked in many years. The council provided us with a dead tree removal crew, which is vitally important. We think we have about 8,000 dead trees in the city. More are dying every day with the various pests that are moving through parts of our city. And about 8,000, that's a rough number. But this dead tree removal crew that you funded and staffed for us is removing at least 800 dead trees a year. And that's really helping us. Also, you funded a proactive tree trimming crew so that we could begin once again trimming trees with city forces on regular weekdays for the first time since 2010. And finally, we've put together a small group to support the sidewalk program. The sidewalk repair program has to work very closely with the trees, and we have a group that is removing trees when that's the only way to fix the sidewalk, but we're also preserving many mature trees by root pruning and finding a way for the tree to coexist with the new sidewalk. So that's how far we've come in the last 4 years with your support. And we have a number of enhancements that we're exploring for coming years that I wanted to share with you. The sidewalk program will need a root pruning program because the mature trees that we've preserved in place, we have to continue root pruning them if they want them to continue to coexist with that new sidewalk without messing it up. We also would like to get back to planting trees proactively by the Bureau. Since the budget crisis, really we refer planting sites to City Plants, which is a not-for-profit, but we'd like to be planting 1,000 trees a year ourselves, and then we would need a tree watering crew to water those trees and water the several hundred trees that have already been planted for the sidewalk program. We'd like to expand our dead tree removal capabilities and our proactive tree trimming capabilities. We're interested in exploring some pilot for a pest management program. Can we restrict the growth of the xylella and other issues that are facing our trees? Can we work with some professionals in this field to experiment with some kind of proactive activity to stop it or slow it rather than just deal with the dead trees after the fact? We've been working with the Board of Public Works on some concepts to restore maintenance of the unimproved median islands, and I'm sure many of your constituents contact you about these. These are the non-irrigated median islands. That maintenance has not been taking place proactively for 7 or 8 years since the budget crisis when that staff was deleted. And the board has the idea of offering that as an introductory contracting opportunity for emerging small businesses. I like this idea very much where, you don't need mowers, you don't need a truck to move the mowers, you really just need some, weed whackers and some garbage bags to maintain the unimproved median islands, and so that could be a way that up-and-coming small businesses could have their first contract with the city. And finally, we're very interested in deploying a public-facing, mobile device-friendly street tree inventory. New York City is a leader in this regard. They have an amazing app you can have on your phone. You can look at the block you're on and click on each tree well and see what kind of tree that is, how old it is, what condition it's in. And we think the future isn't sort of a proprietary database that's just for us, but a database that's for all the stakeholders, and they may even be able to crowdsource information about the tree population. So those are some of the ideas that we're developing. We're waiting to see what, is included in the mayor's proposed budget in April, but hopefully some of these ideas will come before you as part of that proposal.
All sounds great. Tell me a little bit more about how you're working with the sidewalk repair, because that's obviously a new major priority, and as you mentioned, it's inextricably linked with the trees and the root pruning. But the financing is different. So how do you integrate the two programs?
So the sidewalk repair program has positions at BSS that include both concrete construction positions and tree positions. The tree positions still are part of urban forestry, but they face the sidewalk repair program and are paid for by that. A challenge we're having is funding the maintenance of the second tree, right? We want to do a 2-for-1 replacement, so usually when we take a tree out, we're putting it back in that tree well or a nearby tree well to the repair, but then there's a second tree that we're trying to put in, and that we haven't always been able to find funding for planting and establishing that tree with 3 years of watering.
Because it doesn't come out of the sidewalk money, it has to come out of your budget somewhere, or how does that work?
That's right, and in fact, right now, we are watering the trees that were planted for the sidewalk program by diverting staff from other things. We have not yet been staffed and resourced to water these several hundred. How many trees is it, Tim, for the sidewalk program that have been put in so far? He's going to find me that in 1 second. But it's several hundred, and every year there's going to be a few hundred more. So in the very early launch years, what do you have there?
Well, for the sidewalk program,
It's about 200, more than 200 trees have been planted so far, and every year there's going to be more. And so temporarily we're borrowing Median Island maintenance and inspection staff to water those trees, but we really are going to need watering capability in BSS as well to keep up.
we've actually purchased what are called Gator Bags. And this gives an extra 15 gallons to every tree when we go by and we maintenance the well, we fill the Gator Bag, plus we fully water the ground. So that way when we leave, it has an extra day's worth of water there, which is actually helping all these trees to survive, where numbers used to be less survivability because of the way they were being watered and taken care of. So we're trying to get up into the 90 percentile with these trees that will survive from proper watering. Also attracting the roots to grow the way we want them to grow, which is down. So you have to deep water. You can't just go by and splash a little water on the tree and think that that's going to be suffice, because all that does is give a top layer of water, which the roots will grow across the top layer. You have to get the water deep, get the roots to go down and anchor the trees. And right now, just to give you an idea, there's been over 2,000 trees that have been root pruned for this program. So when we're requesting a biannual root pruning crew, it's every year they have to go out and they have to re-inspect the trees. The next year, possibly the ones that need to be root pruned will be root pruned. And this is the way that we can keep these sidewalks in good repair for 10 years. While these trees are large, the younger trees grow to a larger size, and then we can go back in and rotate out the older trees that we've kept, because these sidewalks have to last 20 years to certify them back to the property owner. So by taking on this root pruning, it's harder for us. It wasn't planned, and we are covering these things, and we'll continue to cover them if our budget requests don't get approved. But with the sidewalk repair program, we should be able to have the watering crew that's needed covered under the program, which we don't right now. I'm using additional staff from other tree surgeons, things like that, that could be out doing other jobs.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Greg, Tim, I love you guys, and sometimes I dislike you too. But yeah,
It's okay to be honest.
yeah, but I get where you're coming from. I mean, you guys are making miracles happen on a shoestring budget, and how you mentioned your tree contracting went up to $45 million, and your emergency pruning went from $500,000 to $1 million. But my concern is, in November of 2016, I introduced a motion instructing CAO and BSS to report on the cost effectiveness of the tree trimming and tree removal, because it's not your fault. But, for example, from fiscal year 2010 to 2011, it was $162 per tree. And in fiscal year 15-16, oh, I'm sorry, it was $56 in 2010, 2011. But now, last year, it went up to $162. And I remember for a certain area of my district, we were told that a certain area was going to be trimmed. But unfortunately, beyond your control, it didn't get done, and it got moved over to the next fiscal year. But the next fiscal year, COLA adjustments and everything went up, so now the budget, the contracting budget changed, so only a half the area or three-fourths of the area was covered because the contracting keeps on going up and up. However, at the same time, the CAO determined that city forces are 18% more expensive than contractors. So my question revolves around, is there enough competition in our contractor pool? Why are these prices going up so fast?
Sure. So we have 5 contractors working right now. So there is some competition.
Do we need more?
We can't necessarily manufacture, competitors in the market. But when the economy is slow, the prices drop through the floor. And then when the economy is very busy and there's a lot of private tree work going on, the prices go up higher. One way we've tried to mitigate that is we did 3-year contracts, 1 year with 2 one-year options. And those escalations that were bid were in the 2 to 3% range. So we were able to control we're in the last year right now. Fiscal year 17-18 is the 3rd year of these 3-year contracts. So we were able to control the growth in costs. The direct cost of city workers doing the work is something in the neighborhood of $160, $165 a tree, and the current bids we're getting are around $190. So city forces are starting to be competitive compared with contracting.
Wait, so city forces are actually cheaper now?
Direct costs. So
direct
it challenges how much of the pension, health, city overhead do you want to add on to that? There's lots of different ways to look at that. But we are at a point where, by certain metrics, we're cost competitive with the contractors. But, at some point in the future, when there is not a lot of development going on in the city and there's some future recession, those prices will drop way down again. It's more, it's a very, economically sensitive number.
So right now we have 5 tree contractors.
We have 5 that are actively working for us right now.
So necessarily re-RFPing and opening up the pool to increase the number of contractors won't necessarily drive the prices down.
Well, we don't, there are certain types of contracts that are specialized where you have a pre-qualified pool because you need to demonstrate they have those capabilities. We don't do tree contracts that way. It's open to anybody who wants to bid. So we don't have a limited pool. Each contract we let can have as many bidders as they want. But right now, there are 5 different contractors who have won contracts with us in the last several years.
So can you possibly gauge what percentage of the routine maintenance versus emergency work is done by the city and by contractors?
Well, all the emergency work is done by the city. And you wouldn't want to rely on contractors for that because when you most need it, they're not available because everybody else would want their same resources, right? So all the emergency work is done by Tim's staff, and I'm pleased to say that the first response is within 1 business day on average, and the cleanup is within 3 working days.
So what about
as a result of Tim's
What about
leadership.
the routine maintenance?
So the proactive maintenance right now is probably, would you say, 4/5 contracted and 1/5 city, and we're gradually adjusting that. In the years after the budget crisis, it was all contracted, but we're now gradually, with the $1 million in on-demand and the 1 proactive tree trimming crew we have, starting to shift that balance. But we'd be interested in shifting it even more if that's possible.
So you are looking at increasing the routine maintenance done by city workers?
We are. We have, requested additional crews, and we'll have to see if those are included in the mayor's budget proposal.
And I think you guys do amazing work, and I'd love, I know you gave a verbal report, but if you could forward to my office, and I'm sure other council members would like to know as well, your budget request, because I really want to support you on that. Because like I said, I want to love you guys more than dislike you, but I know that's beyond your control because you're working with what you got, and I want to make sure you have those resources. So I want to make sure you get more resources. So let me know what those budget requests are so we could help fight for you on that.
Ms. Martinez and then Ms. Rodriguez.
Hi, guys. Do you have the numbers of how many trees have been trimmed in my district? Do you have that with you now?
No, I don't have each district divided up, but
You can get that to me later.
I could.
And what areas are you going to be focusing on in the next fiscal year? Do you have any idea?
What we're doing is we're trying to color in
Uh-huh.
the entire city as being done within a certain amount of years. And that's why these budget requests are so important, so that we can do this
But
trimming of all the trees in the city, not in 18 years, but in 10 years.
Right, but you have some idea in my district, for example, where you're going to go next.
I don't exactly.
You don't know
I'm
exactly?
working with setting up the new contracts.
So we had 3-year contracts, so you had a 3-year window ahead of where we were going, and we're getting ready to advertise a new 3-year contract, and now would be a
But
great
you'll
time
have a
to get.
sense of where you're going next then after you
We're,
negotiate the
yeah,
next.
I mean, we're inspecting and looking for locations, and one of the strategies Tim is developing is to find in a given neighborhood, are there certain blocks that if we trimmed, we could say the whole neighborhood was brought into trimmed condition? But he'd love to have your input at this time on places you think are
That's why I
important.
was asking what the focus area is going to be next fiscal year so that we can have an input.
We will have the kind of maps that we generated this year, which were first-class maps made off of Navigate LA, and we're working on those diligently right now, making the maps so you'll be able to share those with you. And then depending upon what the numbers come in for the bids, that area may shrink or it may be larger, depending on how much it is
Let's meet
per
about
tree.
that because I'm interested in having input in that as well. And can you tell me why Urban Forestry is telling constituents to call our offices for tree trimming and advocating that they call their council member because the department needs more money to do more tree trimming?
I did not know that.
Yeah, we talked about this before when you've come before this committee about the need to improve the customer service in terms of people from the public calling into your offices. That continues to be an issue.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention. We've centralized all of our call center operators under one service coordinator, and I can have her meet with your staff.
I can provide you with a call log of when this has happened, where people have called very frustrated that they've called the department and they've been sort of told to call my office because it simply comes down to the need for more money in the budget. And I understand that, but that's not necessarily a response.
That's not our
We need to
policy
be able to
doing
tell
that.
people when we're going to get to their tree, even if it's to 18 years from now. We need to be honest.
Sure. No, I agree. And, there are layers of call centers within the city. So sometimes a call to 311 is answered by ITA's call center. Sometimes it's answered by the smaller BSS call center. Sometimes it's answered in off hours by sanitation's call center. So
Well, we need
there
to
are
centralize it,
operators
yeah.
beyond our organization that may be fielding
Well, let's
some of those
discuss
calls.
that further when you guys come and share the maps with me.
Okay.
The other question I had is, do you know how many tree stump removals you'll have besides the 25 that you're allowed per district?
Stumps?
Stumps, yeah.
So right now, most of the stumps that we're removing are when we remove a dead tree.
So right now, my understanding is you're only allowed, according to the budget, to do 25 tree stumps removals per council district. Has that changed?
So there isn't actually a budgetary program for stump removal, but we do provide a limited amount to each council district
I
anyway.
thought it was 25. Am I mistaken?
That's what we provide, but there is no budgeted
Okay.
program for stump removal. In the past, we were removing dead trees and leaving the stump, which is partly why there's so many stumps out there. Now that we have the proactive dead tree removal crew, we are removing the stump in a timely manner from removing the tree. So we aren't increasing the stump population out there, but we don't currently have a separate funded program to go out and seek out those stumps and remove them, and that's why we have a cap on how many you can request.
And the last question I have, Mr. Chair, is what's the percentage of your workforce that's supposed to retire within the next 5 years, and what are we doing to shift that shift in personnel? Because I think that's something that we should probably start to plan for now.
Yes, I mean, that's one of the great management and administrative challenges our agency and many of our sister agencies face, right, is, there's various estimates, but something like a third of our staff is eligible to retire in the next, 3 to 5 years. We're still trying to figure out if the wave has crested or if it's still growing. This last 18 months has been very high. There are so many people walking out the door that there are some months where we're actually shrinking rather than growing, even though we're full steam ahead on hiring to fill our vacant positions. So when I started with the Bureau 5 years ago, I think the gray wave was in our future. Now it's right here. And, some of it depends on, future contracts for city workers and when their cost of living increases come up. Sometimes people wait around to see if their pension could grow. So it can be quite sensitive to, when the next COLAs are coming and that kind of thing.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Rodriguez.
Hi, thank you. I just have a quick question, and I know, and I think this helps to address some of the budgetary conversations that we have, but what is the success rate in grouping larger populations of tree trimmings when you guys do the grids, and how that affects your budget in terms of being able to group larger quantities together? How much of an impact does that make in terms of the cost savings per tree when you talk about a per tree?
It's all about time savings. So when you can put a tight grid together for a contractor to go in, and he saves time because he doesn't have to go.
Because you have to go from place to place.
Absolutely.
And so how much of the kind of proactive work has been done in order to do that grouping to help reduce our overall costs? Because I know, like, we just did some overtime trimming in Sylmar this weekend, and by doing this one concentrated area, it was a huge cost savings. We were able to do more because, we're concentrating on one particular geographic area.
What we're looking at is trying to keep the grids tight, keep them close together, and with our trimming crew that has been budgeted by the council, and hopefully we can get a few more crews. We can go into the places that are in between these places and color code them in while we're doing other areas that are maybe larger trees for the contractor to do. But make no mistake, the cost of these trees are going up. And the contractors, they're up between $185 and $200, and that's why doing the 3-year contract will kind of help control the cost from going up just year after year, getting new bids, and they can go however they want to. So by design, a lot of these things, they've never been in place before. This was the first 3-year contract ever done for the trees. And just to give you a quick update, in the last 6 months, there was 235 trees planted for the SRP program. So we're at 400 and some trees, I believe, in the back of my mind that we're watering for just the SRP program. An additional dead tree removal crew could get where we could get up to 1,600 trees, stump and tree out, which will open up an additional 1,600 locations for planting. Thus, a planting crew would help. All these different things to better our communities, rather than we go in and decimate the street and have to remove every tree because we've waited too long and the trees are now old and diseased. You rotate the trees out, get new ones in. It's a smarter way to do and handle the urban forest.
What's the optimum cycle for tree trimming?
7 years. At one time, we were on a 7-year cycle back when I started in '96. Even then, you have trees like Chinese elm trees that after 3 or 4 years grow down over the sidewalks low. And that's when we had crews, trimming crews that would go in, supplement that in the interim, raise the trees up. It's just like the tree just got a new trim, just didn't need to trim the entire tree. We raised it up, and that gave us our 9 feet over the sidewalks for the safety of everyone and those kind of things. So 7-year cycle, 700,000 trees, 70,000 trees a year. Right now, we're at about
100,000 trees a year.
Right, I'm sorry, 100,000 trees a year. If we could do it in 10 years, then it would be 70,000 trees a year. But
that's the scope of our challenge, is that we need to be trimming 100,000 street trees a year to be on a 7-year cycle.
So what's the cycle we're on now?
We're trimming about 40,000 a year. So we're not even half to where the minimum best practice would be. And that's, why it's so hard to claw back from the budget crisis when basically we stopped proactively trimming trees. We eventually need to get to the capability to trim 100,000 a year every year.
So more than likely, when someone calls us and they say they need their tree trim, I believe them right off the bat, okay? There's not a question in my mind, although Google's great, we can go take a look and see how long ago it was pruned and those kind of things. But 18 years is too long.
Let me chime in too that, the on-demand program and the city proactive tree trimming crew give Tim the ability to help a constituent that's contacted us or contacted you. When we were down to just emergencies, we would have to try to program their block in a future tree trimming contract. That could be years from now. But today we do have city forces capabilities to respond to, constituents that are really in need to trim trees in advance of special events, the marathon, the triathlon, block parties, whatever the case may be. So we are, getting to some of the requests in a much more timely way than in the past.
And the Olympics are coming. We need to think of from now till then, since it's such a long time to trim trees, we want to have the city in good shape for all the visitors and everyone here. And so anything we can do to better our budget is welcome. We can do more work. Reinvest in the city.
Great. Well, we look forward to working with you on that and obviously getting your budget request. And in fact, how much funding would it take to do it? If we were to just put it all into our department, how much would that cost us?
Well, in our department? That I'm not sure. But if we were outside contracting everything with prices of a year or two ago, it'd be right around $18 million a year to bring it down to
$18 million a year to
just trimming trees.
Just trimming trees. Wow.
Now, our whole budget last year was $20 million.
Okay, colleagues, any additional questions? This was for report only, so thank you so much. Very much appreciate the information.
Thank you.
Look forward to working with you in Budget Committee, as we all are. Mr. Espinosa, is there anything else pending before us?
No, Mr. Chair.
All right. With that, any additional comments or questions, colleagues? No. With that, then this meeting is adjourned.